Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum. I'd like to welcome my two guests from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Hi, Arnie. Good to be here again.
No worries. How's the weather in Canada, Robert?
It's tolerable. It was very cold for a while. Now it's settled down. We had a beautiful sunny day today, light wind, and about 4 above. So
Four
that's
above.
about as good as we can do at this
Okay,
time of year.
I'll wait till Wally's finished before I tell you what it's here. Hello, Wallace Klinck. Welcome. Welcome, Wallace.
Hi there, Arnie. Well, normally it seems like we we alternate between the east and the west in terms of our weather.
hmm
But right now it seems as though they're more or less equivalent. We're having, above freezing temperature generally, and it's been quite nice. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
So the only thing is, I'm lucky. You're lucky I'm with you today because I don't want to admit it, but I slept into 4 o'clock. I had a half an hour to get ready.
Well done. So you've spent the day sleeping, but that's only because you've spent the night working. I know what goes on with you, Wally, so good on you.
No,
I knew this
actually,
was good.
actually, Arnie, he's trying to hibernate for the winter. Just halfway there.
Uh,
Well, I saw a very interesting video on bears, polar bears, and other bears, and sort of got the notion from them.
well done, well done. Hibernating, yeah. Well, I must admit, in winter in Australia, I tend to sleep in, and I love the comforts of staying inside and the combustion heater going and the house warm, and then of course it's blowing a gale outside. But right now it's not blowing a gale. We're actually expecting something like 28, and
Hmm,
it's a
nice.
beautiful blue sky out there. They haven't been spraying,
Mm.
so we've got no jet. What do they call them? Those contrails, whatever it is, where it just
Chemtrails. They call
yeah,
them
all
chemtrails.
of the above. That's right. Um,
Yeah.
and so I've got to, after this forum, I'm actually going to go out and I'm going to open one of the beehives. I've got two beehives in the backyard, and I'm going to open one and put
Oh,
another box on because it's doing so well in our late spring. So yes, the weather's beautiful, the garden's growing, the fruit is setting on the trees. We've started putting our bird netting up to so that we can enjoy our harvest and the birds don't get it. And it really is a lovely time. And this actually leads us into the title for today's discussion: human ecology and social credit. And I just want to draw um, people's attention, our audience's attention, to the League of Rights, the book list. This is actually found under the library, and you'll find the book list on the left-hand column. And these booklets here, Human Ecology and Social Credit, The Legacy of Tom Robertson. Now, it's a booklet written by Michael Lane, and some of the other booklets written by Michael Lane are actually found under the book list, which I think he's been an excellent contributor to social credit thinking. And while we're on that Human Ecology and Social Credit book, I wanted to actually touch on an article that was drawn to my attention. Cheryl Connor, um, you can't have it all. 40% of women professionals are hanging on by a thread. And it's talking about um, not being able to have it all, not being able to have the life of work and family balance, work and home life balance. That it's actually disproportionate towards work and it's actually directly affecting the quality of life of the people concerned. Now, when we talk about human ecology, I've just got to find one more thing to bring up, and that is the actual definition of human ecology is an interdisciplinary study of the relationship between humans and their natural, social, and built environments. So it's a cross-discipline, interdiscipline or transdiscipline, cross-discipline relationship between humans and their environments. And when we talk about can't have it all, man as an economic being, in my view, is disproportionate to his relationship with the world around and certainly with himself. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck?
Well, we live in what has been described as a matrix. The matrix is an environment that is artificially created for us, and that from the time we're infants, we are encouraged to accept as normal. But it is a planned environment. It's got elements that limit our creativity, our ability to think. And through our educational system, we are being narrowed in our potentiality, because from the time kids are in beginning school now, they're being oriented to think that they've got to have some kind of a job. And what a terrible straitjacket to put their thinking in when they're at the stage of exploring and taking in immense amounts of information about their environment, learning language. You know, they have fantastic capacity for this, and yet it's being squeezed into this narrow channel that prepares them for life as a kind of drone, as Wally would say, working in an environment that is limited, and they're held there by the financial pressure upon them, because if they try to escape, they will lose their income. And this is why social credit has an answer to this situation, because social credit proposes to give people supplementary incomes, and increasingly large supplementary incomes, as the capacity for production grows with the introduction of automation and robotization. So yeah, we're in an artificial framework that is defined by us for an elite, by an elite. It's very interesting that most people accept their position in this scheme, but the people who are designing it for us are not part of the scheme to a great extent. They live a kind of life that is quite different from the one that is prescribed for the proletarians, I guess you'd call them. I don't like Marxist terminology, but there's a lot of drudgery and repetition and aimlessness in the kind of work that people are required to do now.
Yeah, it's interesting you use the proletariat word, the Marxist word, because I've spent this past week having a look at liberalism, libertarianism, and laissez-faire. And if I was to, and it's only in its infancy, my research, by the way, but what it does is it alludes to my mind that there is a Puritanism to it, a Puritan worth ethic, that if you are not working, if you are not actually part of the economic system, if you're not an economic rational person, then you're not deserving of any rewards whatsoever. And I find it really frustrating that that a person can be placed into this rational perspective of where those in power can be indifferent to the well-being of the individual. It's to me, it's devoid of any sort of spiritual relationship with the individual at all. Your thoughts, Wally?
Well, I agree with you, Arnie. Definitely, actually, libertarian is very rigid when it comes to Puritanism. There is nothing to come from nothing in libertarian philosophy, and they have no approach to the financial system that would really extend the benefits of human association and widen the field, other than through really intense individual application to self-enrichment. It's kind of actually, I find the libertarian philosophy, although it professes to stand for, well, liberty, I don't think it really stands for freedom in the full sense. I mean, if you look at nature, organisms in nature are not usually organized in such a way as to have a dominant pyramidal structure. The organisms generally draw sustenance from their environment without taking too many orders from anybody else. In humankind, we have set up a structure, a pyramidal structure, an organization where authority comes down from the top, and our lives are very much dominated and regulated and by this type of association or relationship. And when you consider the nature of human beings, the creative nature of human beings, the exploitative nature of human beings, it would seem that this puts an artificial stricture on the individual's life, which really, really circumscribed his life as it was really meant to be, in terms of the potential that it actually holds.
Mm,
Because our lives, like this article that Bob has referred to with the ladies having a high degree of, well, dissatisfaction with their lives. Now that has come about because of as social credit has demonstrated, we don't have enough purchasing power to buy what's being produced. And increasingly, we have even less purchasing power,
hmm
so that members of the family are driven out
hmm
into the commercial economic world. And that includes women who might prefer to, I mean, let's face it, running a home and raising children is a very, very challenging thing.
mm,
That's why today the homes have been neglected so badly, because the guidance has not been there, the example has not been there. And this has had a very devastating effect on society. We see it in terms of well, the aimlessness or the crime, the lack of civility, you might say, that we see in society today,
hmm
the lack of literacy. A lot of what makes up the human being comes from that person's earliest associations with his parents and adults around him. And this is extremely important because, as was said, children are extremely absorptive. They're just unbelievably absorptive.
hmm
It's really a beautiful thing to see.
hmm
But by the time you get passed through a process that more or less standardizes your approach to life, a great deal of that creativity is squelched.
hmm
So I think that, and if you go to the Wikipedia article on social credit, and not the social credit system, social credit, I
hmm
must stress, it starts out by saying that social credit is an interdisciplinary field.
hmm
And that's what it is, because it deals with primarily the principles of association. Association is the basis of life. And we cannot just assume that association doesn't occur according to certain principles. Now, they're either going to be principles that are established by a pyramid of human power, or they're going to be established by natural law, just the way things are. And natural law, being the way things are, would seem to be a much sounder guide to life than putting yourself under the direction of other human beings.
mm. Yeah,
You
no,
know, so, you know, we've as human beings, we have um, we're rather delicate creatures, but we've been able, because we have the ability to alter our environment, we have been able to move far, far beyond ordinary organisms, which usually do not change their environment too much. So, but in so doing, we've had to set up structures. Now, the problem is the structure that we set up under the present financial system is such that it is a pyramid of not only activity, but a pyramid of power.
mm,
So what we should be doing is maximizing the amount of freedom that the individual gets or derives from his associations, rather than putting the individual in some kind of a straitjacket,
hmm
a prescribed mode of behavior and activity that dominates his whole life.
yeah. No, while it is an extensive summary, Wally, that's very, very important because we actually build. It's like putting a puzzle together, and to me, the things like the establishment of, if you like, law, the establishment of government, of things like that. What purpose behind it? What is the design or the intent behind it? And why is it that a limited constitutional government is more stable? Why is it that a federal system, where you do have a central government, but you also have regional governments to actually maintain a lot of administrative requirements, but the regional governments are essentially a check on each other and also on the central government. Now, I know that in Australia we have a clearly defined but much abused limited constitutional government. We have a limited constitutional system. It belongs to the people. We the people. That's the preamble. We the people of the various states. And so it is a federal and limited constitution. And by that, it means that power is divested. It's not like the dominance hierarchy. There are only certain things that the federal government should be involved in and no more. And in other forums, we're discussing the encroachment of the federal government on those other things. But where I'm coming from this is that the intent or purpose or development of a people is not one or should not be one of domination, but rather providing a secure environment of known parameters of which people can operate their freedom or exercise their freedom confidently. And this, of course, is being eroded more and more as we move more towards this centralist philosophy, centralist government. Your thoughts, Robert Klinck?
Well, people need to have the means of controlling their lives. And if you have a highly centralized system, then that control passes from them. And, you know, if they want to do some little repair job, they need a bunch of screws to do it. They have to have the ability to obtain what they need in the way of materials to make that effective in their lives. So if you have the need for every human action to be authorized by some central authority, the system just won't work. It'll be tremendously inefficient. There's no way you can get around it. And I think if you look at the results of the society in which we're living, some of them are so shocking that it's hard to believe that they're tolerated. You know, so many people in prison and just abandoned there in prison. And why is it, for example, that the United States per capita has 7 times more people in prison than Canada? This has got to be an artificial phenomenon. And I think it's because the love of money is the root of all evil, and there's a lot of money to be made in administering prisons. I just think, you know, of people who are driven to prostitution in order to survive economically. And I just can't get my mind around how this can be tolerated. And there's also an epidemic of suicide going on in society. More and more. There was a discussion by a young fellow this week of the United States. More people commit suicide in the United States every year than were killed in the Vietnam War. It's a Holocaust. That's what it is. A dreadful situation. In Japan, I know when I was studying in university, I was told that an unbelievable percentage of students committed suicide because they competed in the national exams or whatever. They didn't measure up, and therefore they figured their lives were over. Well, this is a terrible assessment of the value of human life. It's just, you know, no empathy there at all for, and no recognition of the value of the life, regardless even of the contribution it might make to society. Human life is valuable in itself.
That's
and
right.
we can't know all the aspects of any person's life. We have to, you know, give them the chance to live their life. So
Yeah.
in Japan, in fact, there is I think it's in Tokyo, there's a suicide park where people who have lost their jobs or aren't getting promotions or whatever, they're encouraged to go and it's just a regular part of life over there.
Wow.
Well, it's a dreadful thing, and I think it's a reaction to this Puritanism that defines the value of human life in very narrow terms, and says that if you are not measuring up as a worker, then your life is valueless, meaningless, and you're irrelevant to society.
Yeah.
That is not the Christian concept. The
No.
Christian concept is that the personality is infinitely valuable, and people have a progression to make through life, and you give them every opportunity you can to make that progression in a happy and productive way.
Yeah. No, beautifully put, Robert. And that's a very vivid picture that you've painted. I read an article, it's a booklet by Jeffrey Dobbs. It's called The Local World. It's actually a sequel to On Planning the Earth, which is a, if you like, a précis, a summary or an assessment of the centralizing effect of the Tennessee Valley Authority and the outworking of the development, if you like, of this centralizing, finding expression in the atomic and hydrogen bombs. And in the introduction to The Local World, Jeffrey talks about the individual and how IQ or any other measure of intelligence is irrelevant, because even if you like, the simple person, has another point of view, and that point of view may be in regard to something like animals, or in regard to the environment, something that they look at and observe, and others are oblivious to. And it is the most beautiful picture that Jeffrey paints of the individual and their opportunity to make a significant contribution to others in their community. It's not about money. It's not about the abstraction of money. It's about actually life and the relationship with the real world. Human ecology, such an important consideration rather than the abstraction finance. Wallace.
Yes, Arnie, it is a profound thing. When I look into the eyes of my niece's little boy,
Mm.
I'm absolutely spellbound.
Mm.
It's such purity, it's such curiosity, it's such trust. It is something that is beyond the mere physical. And of course, the Marxist view is that everything is just physical.
Mm-hmm.
You have no prior life, you have no spiritual life, you have no life in the future. You're just protoplasm.
Mm.
And of course, that leads to the idea of the superiority and the dominance of the powerful.
Mm-hmm.
The might is right. And that's the way they work, because they don't argue the points. They merely bully. They don't argue their points. They don't want to argue their points. They only want to have their way. And of course, that is just a really gross violation of the individual.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we have a situation here in Canada where Canada is getting to the point where it could actually break up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because people are not satisfied. They're not happy. Well, Douglas said if people behave in an undesirable way or in an antisocial manner or annoyed when they're troubled, well, maybe the intelligent thing would be to stop bothering them.
That's right.
In other words, let them live a natural life. Well, we don't have a natural life. And this is all about money again, because in the very late 30s, we had a commission that set up a program or a plan to distribute incomes across the country so that all provinces could have more or less equal levels of social services. Well, of course, it wasn't. It was a question of taking from some and giving to others. Well, of course, in the social credit analysis, we are short of purchasing power. And with the passage of time and the refinement of technology, the purchasing power gets less and less relative to what is required. Well, you can see that if you have a nation that's set up on a basis of equalizing benefits across from province to province. And this principle holds true where there is a scarcity of money that develops more and more. Obviously, there's going to be tension, and the tension is going to get greater and greater. And so it's a destructive thing. And it's because we don't have any recognition of the idea of inheritance.
Mhm.
You know, an organism in nature goes out and simply doesn't question whether or not it has the right to partake of whatever is available for its survival. It just goes ahead and does it. But we have a whole structure of morality, so-called morality, that is built up, which actually values us only as an economic functionary primarily.
Mm.
I mean, that would be it would be wrong to say that was entirely true, but increasingly it is true because we're on a treadmill where we're running and running and running, trying to keep up with that, and it's just an explosion of debt,
Mhm.
which we have to service. We have
Mhm.
to service, and that means that our lives are just taken up more and more by activity, and we have to stop and think. What is the activity? Is the activity related to the actual quality of our life, or is it just activity for the sake of activity, being actually to service debts? Now, are these debts real? Or are they illusionary? Are they fraudulent? Are they real or not? Well, social credit says that they're not real because they're simply a result of the banking system appropriating the communal credit or the right to ownership of the communal credit,
Mhm.
which they will foreclose on if you don't repay these artificial debts that they create.
Mhm.
And so, you know, we're living in a dream world. We're really, I'm afraid we are living in an absolutely surreal existence, which is becoming necessarily more surreal as we go on.
Mhm.
And this is a question of association again. What is the quality of our association? Is it giving us the results we want and need, or is it just giving us more work?
Yeah. No, good summary. Good summary, Wallace. And it's interesting. I'm we've got this tyranny of time because it's I know this is only the introduction, human ecology and social credit, but I'm looking at the time, and I think we've covered a good introduction on it. And I know that we're going to explore this subject further and further. Man's relationship with the world around him, and how can that be placed in perspective? I believe Douglas social credit has responded to this in that if you like, the argument of labour, the Marxist argument of labour, the laissez-faire capitalist argument of if you like, money, or if you like, the productive capacity. He's resolved these two issues in the form of social credit, in the national dividend, the consumer price discount. He has resolved the dialectic. We don't have to accept the narrative that labour and capital are always arguing, but rather they can be resolved in the form of a national dividend, that the financial system can be placed in equilibrium, that we can find, I think the word is homeostasis, the correct relationship, the equilibrium, man's relationship with his world around and with each other. I'll call for closing comments on that. Robert Klinck.
Well, if you posit full employment as the ultimate good in society, then inevitably you end up in a situation where there's a huge amount of make work. It's work that is irrelevant or redundant. And this is undoubtedly psychologically damaging to people
Hmm.
because they want to do something that delivers genuine results. So this system we have uh, prevents them from fulfilling themselves in that way to a great extent. And that is another reason why social credit is so important, because it could liberate people from the pressure to participate in useless activities merely for the sake of garnering an income.
Yeah. Good summary, Robert. Thank you for that. Wallace Klinck, closing comments, please.
Yes, I think Douglas has resolved the problem by restoring the commons. But the commons is the general inheritance that we have from the benefits or the profit, if you want, of association, which goes beyond the contribution of mere human labor.
Mhm.
We now have factors of production which far, far exceed human labor in their contribution to the production of wealth. And unless we find a way to distribute that, and debt is not a way of distributing it, because if you're in debt, you have to work in order to pay that debt off. It's
Mhm.
defrayed, it's delayed,
Mhm.
but nevertheless, it's there. And so that unless we find a way of releasing the abundance of the kingdom that is there, that is a product of, well, nature, it's just the way things are. And unless we can get away from restricting the access of every person to that inheritance by releasing them from the bondage of Puritanism, which is an abstract metaphysical restraint, an artificial restraint that we placed on them in terms of measuring their worth, then we will never solve our problem. We have the realistic basis of doing that. We have demonstrated it. We have phenomenal productive capacity, but
Mhm.
so much of it has just been wasted just to provide a job.
Mhm.
Well, we're not, the purpose of production is consumption. It is not to provide more work.
Mhm.
I mean, if you take that attitude, you were just headed for the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah.
So I think that the idea of inheritance is this. Marx was obsessed with work. Douglas brought in the question of inheritance, the unearned increment of association.
Mhm.
And that is the realistic solution to our problem, not
Yeah,
more work,
that's
and
right.
not making work equally accessible to everybody. This is the most damaging thing today, because all of these activities toward equality are designed essentially, they're appealing to the person's need for sustenance and for their misguided sense of justice in trying to obtain equality. Well, equality is static, and we want associations to which there is no limit.
Mm. Beautifully put. Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Robert. It's been a very good forum. This is the first of many. Human ecology and social credit. Arnie Luks, thanks very much.
Thank you, Arnie.
Thank you, Annie.